everybody, today we're talking about Spider-Man Life Story Extra. Hey everybody, and welcome back to BK's Bullets. As always, I'm your host, Brent, and today we're talking about some Spider-Man. This is Spider-Man Life Story. This specifically, it says Extra, but there is also this version out there also. What is the difference? Let's get into that first. So, Spider-Man Life Story is written by Chip Zdarsky, drawn by Mark Bagley, and it is a what-if version of Spider-Man if he lived his life as long as he has been published. So if he's truly a teenager in the 60s and gets, spider powers, then what happens to him? And he ages with time as his publishing history does, except all of the events that happened in each decade are somewhat represented here at the proper age he would be as long as he's been published. So like if he's a teenager in the 60s, he's Spider-Man in the 60s, by the time he gets to the 90s, he's like 40s or 50s, and he's going through the Clone Saga as a 40-year-old, that kind of thing. So it's interesting to see the character of Spider-Man age as you're going through this storyline. So we'll get to that in a minute. So what is the difference between these two trades I have? Spider-Man Life Story and Life Story Extra. Well, originally Life Story was 6 issues. And they're a great 6 issues. You're going to get my full recommendation here in a minute. And then they decided to do an annual. And the annual is contained in this version, Spider-Man Life Story Extra. Now, I believe the oversized hardcover of Spider-Man Life Story does have the annual in here. And the annual is a story about J. Jonah Jameson throughout these same number of decades and what his life looked like. So it's not it's not mandatory reading in terms of Spider-Man Life Story. It's just an added on extra exclamation point. It's a nice little coda to the entire piece. So, I would recommend looking for this version if you haven't already picked it up. If you have already, picked up Spider-Man Life Story, then go get it. Like I, for instance, picked this up a while ago, and I think I did an overview on the channel on it. I can't remember. But then I saw that there was an actual trade of the extra version, so I bought that. And now I have 2, so this will probably be given away to somebody at some point, right? So Spider-Man Life Story, like I said, Chip Zdarsky, Mark Bagley. You're going through Spider-Man's life as he ages in the publishing history. So in the 60s, it's all about the Vietnam War. And he's got these awesome covers here that are kind of reminiscent of what's going on in the decade. You got Spider-Man talking about being drafted, getting spider powers, meeting Gwen Stacy, falling in love with her. So it's not everything happens to Spider-Man the same way it does in, the what is it called? Chronology or in canon. There's a twist every single time there's a new issue in a new decade so that you can keep going with this conceit. And seeing what those twists are is part of the fun in every issue. The 90s story when we're doing the Clone Saga for real, that is an interesting twist. What happens after that is very interesting. The way they deal with Venom here is very short and quick, and it kind of coincides with Kraven's Last Hunt. And that comes back to haunt Spider-Man in the 2010s, or maybe is it the 2000s? I'm flipping through here. But anyway, by the time you get to, it's the 10s, so 2010s, Spider-Man is an old man. You got Miles Morales, Peter Parker here has gray hair. Miles Morales has shown up. And what's fun about this issue is that in the 2010s, if you recall, we had the Superior Spider-Man story where Doc Ock took over Spider-Man. So that's kind of playing out here as well as tying in with the Miles Morales of it all. So there's a whole lot of fun things in here. You have Spider-Man having children. You have Doc Ock falling in and out of love with Aunt May. You have the Kraven's Last Hunt thing with Venom. You have the Clone Saga, the original Clone Saga here happening in the late 70s with Gwen Stacy. And then you have it again in the 90s with Ben Reilly. And then at the beginning of the 2000s issue, you have Moreland coming in. So you get an evolution of Spider-Man as the publishing history goes to see it's really cool as an older reader in terms of age and also later in the publishing history to realize that, hey, you know, even though if you go back and read some of these stories, they may seem a little dated because the writing style has changed, they are in fact really, really good stories and really, really interesting stuff. So I think that's part of the fun too, is this fresh modern take on these older stories, and it's like, wow, that's really interesting. I really wonder what they did in the original version. So I could go back and read that. That's very interesting. So I think it's a whole lot of fun. And Mark Bagley here is just at the top of his game. He's killing it. If you don't know Mark Bagley, he did Ultimate Spider-Man for a long, long time. He's got two inkers on here, John Dell and Andrew Hennessy. You got Frank D'Armata doing the colors, doing a phenomenal job. And it's just a really, really good story. I loved it. I think it kind of fell apart at the end, though, with the 2000s and the 10s. Like, going through the 90s, it's like 5 out of 5 stars all the way through. And then when you get to the end of the 90s and the 2010s, it's like, oh, wow, we have to wrap this up really fast. And it just felt all of a sudden like, I think the 2000s, that story I liked. But when you got to the 10s, that final issue, issue number 6 here, it's like, man, this is just, it could have been so much longer. Like, I wanted a double page or, a double-sized issue. There was more story to tell. It just felt really kind of sudden because we're zooming off on an adventure with Doc Ock and Miles Morales in space with Venom and Kraven and a whole bunch of like loose ends that get tied up back together. It just kind of all of a sudden, it just fell apart a little bit towards the end. But I do recommend reading this book 100%. It is a lot of fun if you're a Spider-Man fan. The extra here is the annual, and the annual tells the story of J. Jonah Jameson. And basically like, hey, we're going to hold J. Jonah Jameson to account for his spider crimes that he commits in the 60s with the Spider Slayer and the Scorpion and all this stuff, and he ends up going to jail. So it's as if he was never forgiven in the comic books and we're in the real world kind of thing. So he's in jail for like 30 plus years, and you see him struggling, viewing Spider-Man on like the prison TV in the corner and going, Spider-Man, what a menace, and how that affects him and his family. His son comes into the picture, John Jameson. He was an astronaut at one point in time. He ends up talking with Peter Parker here and still can't let go of Spider-Man, and it's just like, you just see what this hatred's doing to this guy in prison and just destroying his life, or so you think. And it ends in a way that's like, wow, I did not see that coming. So Chip Zdarsky, I think, really cemented himself for me as a fantastic writer when I was reading this. I've read his Batman stuff. His Failsafe arc is really good. The one after that I thought was fun. But when I read this, I was like, man, he really does have something to say. And this is phenomenal stuff. So Spider-Man Life Story, go and check it out. Pick up, I think, either copy, whatever you can find is fine. You can always buy the extra on online or something digitally, or at a con or something like that if you want to add on to it. But if you do see the extra version, definitely, if you have a choice between the two, get this one, because that annual is just a little bit of fun coda at the end. So Spider-Man Life Story, 2 thumbs up, well recommended out of my library here on BK's Bullets. Let me know down below in the comments what you thought of this comic book, and we'll see you guys next time in the Funny Pages.